Okay, so my name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the chair of the Issues Committee at Progressive Massachusetts. Wanted to thank my wonderful guest this evening, Roxana Rivera from SEIU 32BJ. We're going to talk about the impact of the kind of ongoing pandemic and economic fallout on service workers, and what's been happening on the ground, what we need to do in the short term, as well as what are the long-term long-term changes that we already needed, that this is showing how important it is that we pass so that we come out better on the other side. So Roxana, can you just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that your union does?
Yeah. So I'm Roxana Rivera. I'm the Vice President of the Service Employees International Union, Local 32BJ. We represent janitors, security officers, maintenance workers at office buildings, airports, universities, all across Massachusetts. Largely our workers are contracted out. They work for contractors, and largely they are people of color, immigrants, where they live in communities that have been hardest hit by COVID-19, where it's not so easily that they can do social distancing and taking other precautions. Our workers have been impacted greatly because they are seen as essential workers. Again, given the nature of this virus, the majority of our workers are cleaners, and so they're cleaning, and this is something that's very essential given the nature of this virus. So they cannot work remotely. They have to basically show up to work, and whether it's cleaning, the trains at the train station or at the airport or the state office building, or in a private university like Harvard or MIT. All those places, are basically still, asking workers to show up to work. And workers have a lot of fear and anxiety, obviously, is what, they're facing right now, because obviously they need the income because they cannot afford to be laid off and not having a source of income for their families. But they're also concerned about commuting to work, right, and the issue of contracting COVID-19 and bringing that back to their families. We've already, unfortunately, had just in the last, couple of weeks, a few members have already passed away due to COVID-19, and our union actually is up along all of these coasts, and we have service workers that do work similar to here in Massachusetts across the East Coast, and we've actually had over close to 100 members that have lost their lives due to COVID-19. Because they cannot work remotely. They are essential workers, and they're showing up to work and putting themselves at risk, right? And so we've been working hard at the issues of personal protective equipment for workers, right? And really pushing that forward. And that has been a struggle. Employers are slow to catch up to what the needs are for workers to protect themselves. And then the whole issue is access to supplies, right? And that has been an issue. So we, alongside, basically advocating on a daily basis with employers and having them do contract tracing, allowing for folks to quarantine and pushing them to pay people so that they're not working sick because they can't afford to take a day off, right? And so we've been pushing those issues, like many in the Commonwealth. But those are issues that we've also looked to take to the federal government, right? Because what we've seen in the past weeks is no single institution or building owner was equipped to basically have anything in place to say, this is what we do when something like this happens, right? And so they're kind of making it up as they go. And we've seen good examples, and we've seen very bad examples. of how they've reacted to this situation. And so we're really pushing at the federal government level as they go into the fourth round of legislative talks around a bailout, right, is that there be a requirement for personal protective equipment, a kind of a mandate, and then also that mandate is backed up with issue around access to supplies, right? And so it's not, and so we're pushing on that issue just because that has been, we're actually right now, we've been in contact with over 200 members that have contracted COVID-19, right? And so, following their progress somewhat, and also making sure that, at the workplaces that they're actually not, doing practices that lessen the risk of exposure, right? But again, there was, so that has been the number one struggle, obviously, is just the safety, because it is a life and death issue, as we've personally experienced with members. And I think that that's true for other service workers, whether it's in food or, other workers. There was just a report that a worker working for Sky Chef, which is, food service for the airline industry, just died this week. And so many have contracted the COVID-19, right? As we've seen in obviously meat packing factories and other, places, right? It's just, so really no single employer is going to basically be able to dictate what should be the practice and what should the safety precautions, what should be the requirements. And so we really need the federal government to come into play on that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've seen also, even though that our workers are essential, they've also experienced a number of layoffs, right? So we have 20,000 members that work as security or janitorial or property service at universities. And, about close to 4,000, have been laid off. And many times only with 1 or 2 day notice.
Wow.
And that is very difficult. That basically compounds the already notice that you're going to get laid off, but the fact that you don't get any notice, it's really difficult. And a lot of times they say, well, it's the contractor, and because of the structure of the industry, that doesn't allows for building owners to kind of wash their hands of like, okay, that's the contractor, not me, displacing these workers. And so that has been another issue, and that's been really hard for folks. And so we are actually in this next round of the federal government bailout talks, we are asking for layoff protection, in the sense of making sure that there is some incentive for employers to keep people on the payroll, even if they're not working in this moment in time. Because I literally, we've had workers that, they weren't ready for this, and unemployment takes weeks to kick in. First, you have to figure out how you apply. And initially, just weeks ago, they didn't even have, when you applied, there was issues around even having the things translated, so they could apply properly, right? And that has been rectified to, and made it more accessible. But it took, it's taken weeks. And so that's also been a struggle for folks. So we're basically at the federal level now asking for layoff protection, because I'm going to say, I, got on the phone with big building owners, like the owner of the Prudential, right? That iconic building, right? And again, they succumbed to what they were seeing around them, of people just saying, we don't have people in the building, so we're gonna just, cut these people off with nothing, and that is, that's been a difficult challenge as well. The other issue that has come up for workers is the issue of essential pay. Because if you're an essential worker, yet, but you see yourself not having that recognized. For example, we represent some food workers at Tewksbury Hospital, and the direct hospital workers are getting what you would call hazard pay, right? But
Yeah.
they're because they're contracted out for a contractor, that doesn't necessarily extend to them. And in this moment in time, there's a lot of workers that feel like they are taking an extra risk in showing up to work because they're being required. And many of them, their own family members have been laid off, and so they're already challenged that way, that they're not having the household income that they had before. So it does make a difference for people, for this work to be acknowledged, this service work to be acknowledged in a way of saying, folks, have some essential pay. So that's the third ask that we're having at the federal government. And we've been having members actually making calls to our congressional folks to make these demands as they go back in, whenever they do end up going back, right? That they would be asking for essential pay for property service workers, because we know that there are certain workers that have been seen as essential workers as far as first responders, right? But we think that property service workers, other workers that do service work, grocery workers, right, need that same protection.
Yeah. Especially when you see that with the hospitals, that like for that hospital to function, right? For like we think about, let's say, like the doctors and nurses, but they need to eat when they're there, and they need to have like clean and sterilized hospital, and that doesn't happen on its own.
Right. So those are, so all of those, that is why we're doing a big push of reaching out to our congressional delegation, even here in Massachusetts, right, and across the East Coast, to basically push forward that property service workers that are essential workers, and it's not only them, right? There's efforts for grocery workers and other frontline workers that we wanted to be included in this next relief legislation. So the other issue that we're seeing too is so higher education is a huge economic engine here for Massachusetts.
Yeah. I live near Northeastern Berkeley and all of those other colleges.
Yeah, and so we have about, here in Massachusetts, we're probably in about 30 different colleges and universities, our members. They're cleaning or in security or doing maintenance work, either directly for the university or contracted out. And for the most part, as they sent students home weeks ago, right, they've been maintaining the workforce at the, cleaning after the students left the dorms, like cleaning, deep cleaning the dorms and things like that. So there's been work there, but my concern is really what happens from the summer, and more importantly in the fall. And there's a concern because they've, like Harvard made an agreement to pay people, till the end of May, whether they're working or they're in rotation or they're at home, which has, been very important in this moment. But I am concerned about what it means for we have about 5,000 workers what happens to them in the summer, but more importantly in the fall. And, as these universities are thinking about what to do, and how they're going to open up, and if they're going to open up in the fall. I do foresee more layoffs is what I'm, so that is going to be hard because, if, again, I don't know how the universities are going to be viewing when they're going to bring students back, how quickly, and are they going to bring back students mid-semester if they've already opened up the semester in one way, so that is of a big concern, and because it only took when Harvard was one of the first universities, I think, here in Massachusetts to send to say that they were sending the students home. It was literally within a 72-hour period that 25 schools, you know, or
Wow.
more actually sent folks home, you know, and students home. And it made those announcements. And so it
Yeah.
just happened so quickly that just that issue of it being happening so quickly impacts workers in a very different way, you know, if it had you know, if it would happen over a course of a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing that from like the perspective of students, since as I know that I live near a number of the colleges in Fenway, and like Northeastern had told like whatever day it was that they told them like you're out Tuesday, end of business.
Exactly.
And so there was like a mad rush to buy boxes at the local hardware store and like all of the
Yeah.
malls, which is like something that like just like how rapidly that all happened,
Yes.
and the impact it has for people who like clearly like nobody would have been prepared, like could have prepared for that, for them, let's say for the economic impact that could have on them.
No, yeah, and so yeah, so I am concerned about obviously what it means for a lot of, you know, beyond our own members, right? All workers that are in the economy around them, you know, that really rely on these institutions, you know, and so that, you know, we'll have to be in a wait and see moment for them. But we are, as a union, we are trying to think about, you know, if and when the economy reopens, how does that, you know, what are the things that we want to be
Yeah.
asking for, you know, as far as particularly in the safety of workers, you know, in the work site. And so we're starting to have those conversations, and to try to you know, because we saw that there wasn't you know, there wasn't, you know, anything that was letting, you know, kind of dictating to all these institutions and workplaces, you know, how best to do this. And
Yeah.
you know, we want to keep, you know, working families as safe as we can, you know, as you know, the economy is looking to be reopened.
Yeah. One thing, so you're talking about how a lot of your members end up working for contractors. Are there ways that, like, either say at the state or federal level, that we could be passing what kind of legislation to kind of hold the employers more responsible for what the contractors are doing, so that they can't just claim, sorry, not us?
Yes, no, and we just on the when there was because the first industry that we saw that was really impacted too was the airline industry, you know, in the first weeks of this. And we we represent about, you know, probably about 1,500 workers at Logan Airport, right? And many of them service the actual they're subcontracted out by the airlines. So they actually clean the planes. They do the wheelchair assistance, you know, at the airport,
Yeah.
because those workers actually are outsourced by the airlines, not by the airport itself. And so they the thing is when there was discussion about how to, you know, how to bail out the airlines, right? We basically pushed forward at the federal level to make sure that it included not only the airlines, but the airline contractors, right?
Yeah.
That they would be getting some of that relief to basically provide, you know, relief for the contracted workers, right? Because so
Yeah.
it is, so, and we were successful actually. Senator Markey championed, you know, that with the sign-on letter of, you know, to really push forward those talks to get, and so we were able to be successful in that, which was a first, in all honesty. A first at that level, right, of literally them seeing that these workers are not invisible workers, right, and that they're actually, you know, and just because of the structure that the airlines have created to basically cut costs, right, in that subcontracting out, that didn't mean that in this moment in time those workers were as affected as any employee, you know, working for these airlines are. And so yeah, so definitely we when we advocate at the federal level, like we are right now with this next round of the bailout, we are also we're talking about contracted workers, right? We're,
Yeah.
you know, largely, and we're saying all property service workers, but we know in property service, the lion's share are contracted out. And so we want to always make the connection, right? That you know, they can have different employers, but there should be the same standards, you know?
Yeah.
And so we push, you know, you know, in a lot of these, like in our higher education institutions like Harvard, you know, half the workers that do cleaning are contracted out, and half actually work for the university directly. And we constantly, even through this because each of the schools can choose to subcontract out to their own, using their own, you know, allotment of their budget.
Yeah.
And so this came down with when this initially happened, and they had made a policy to extend payment of workers, even if they weren't working, you know, the entire week, right? But at first it was only for direct hired workers, and not extended to the contractors. And so, you know, there was a lot of advocacy on behalf of the different unions on campus and students to really push for all contracted out workers, like the dining workers, all that they would also be able to be able to, you know, be supported by this policy. And so, but literally that is something that I know it will come up again, you know, if they choose, if you know, whatever actions they choose to how they're going to deal with the fall, you know, that will come up again. And so it is, we have to push the entities that, you know, however they want to have, you know, how they want to structure, how they employ, you know, we're going to be fighting for, you know, parity, you know, amongst workers.
And one policy that we've been seeing the kind of discussion around on the state level and on the federal level to offer to help kind of protect public health of workers is expanding paid leave policies and kind of paid sick time. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important to workers who still have to go in?
Yeah, so that is actually something that, again, you know, the state taking a more a role in that is really important, because different employers are dealing with it in different ways, right? And I'm not talking about little employers. I'm talking I'll take, for example, Boston University has, you know, they employ probably 11,000 people, right? We have about 700 members there. They basically said that if someone if you're you know, if you're not feeling well, if you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, you know, we don't want you to be here, but they said that you need to use your own time, or we'll give you time unpaid, right? But the issue is that that's really hard on people, and it doesn't do the public any good, because people are staying at work longer than they should, which puts, you know, exposure onto other people, right? And because people can't, and so, you know, we've had some employers that have been willing to commit to paying for, you know, the time of the quarantine, and other employers that have chosen not to, because, you know, they're saying they can't economically do it. And so I think that again, this is like, because, you know, the nature of this crisis and stuff, having things that we were already fighting for years. I mean, even to get the first 6 days in Massachusetts, you know, decades, right? And so, but seeing that importance, right, of that work, right, that at least, you know, but that we know in these moments we need to that needs to be strengthened, you know, for folks. And given even the nature of this crisis, even more so, it's a public safety issue as well.
Yeah. And then one other thing in terms of policies that have already been advocated for a while, but that are still relevant now. I know here in Massachusetts, 32BJ has been kind of a leader in the fight to kind of remove immigration status as a barrier for driver's licenses. And can you talk a little bit about why that's becoming, let's say, even more salient for kind of for workers now, given everything going on?
Yeah. So in this COVID-19 crisis, you have seen even a compounding impact for folks that are immigrants and undocumented immigrants, right? That many times live in the same household together because they're a family unit. The issue is that you know, right now it is really, we are pushing, even in light of all of this, right? We're even with more urgency, we're pushing forth that the state could take action and pass the Work and Family Mobility Act, which is, you know, will allow qualified immigrants to apply for a driver's license. The issue is people are afraid right now to take public transit, you know, to go, because, you know, there's issues around overcrowded busing, right? Buses, and people, they really need to, in order, you know, even to contribute to more safe, you know, social distancing and stuff, their ability to be able to drive a car in this moment is will keep them safer, right? And keep others safe, right? Safer than they are. I think that is, we've seen that as an issue, and that has, people need to be able to be mobile, right? And not, and that is something that, you know, and it will also provide revenue for the state.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, in the fees, in, you know, in the taxes, all those gasoline taxes, that all of that it will provide millions of revenue for the state, you know. So it is something that we're pushing for, and we think even has this crisis has highlighted the need even more to, you know, there's no reason why, you know, we should be tying the, you know, the right to drive in the state to a federal immigration that, you know, is obviously, you know, that's a different purpose. So.
Yeah, no, that, like, because if people are going to be driving, we want them to be able to be driving safely, and that to be able to have economic security, you do need that mobility.
Yes, yeah, and they need to. The thing is, we want people to be tested. You know the rules of the road. They keep themselves safe and other people safe. So we do think that there's a big benefit to the Commonwealth with that, with the added revenue, right? And we think it's, you know, obviously important. Our immigrant communities contribute, you know, millions to our state budget. I mean, they're paying taxes. So what is interesting is right now there's billions of dollars that people pay into taxes, you know, because they allow undocumented through what we call not a social security number, but a ITIN number, right? I think in Massachusetts, it's like 40,000 people, right? That yet they've been contributing for years, you know, in contributing to paying taxes, yet right now they can't even apply for unemployment.
Yeah, which is absurd.
You know, so the state, you know, they find a way to get people, to get undocumented folks to pay taxes through you know, creating an ITIN number, but yet they can't figure it out for people to basically be able to seek unemployment. So we were happy to see that there were some state legislators that actually did put forth a bill for that, so that they could actually create a way in which folks that do have an ITIN number can actually apply for unemployment. So that was, you know, again, it's, you know, it's going to be a revenue issue in the sense of it's costing this, you know, it'll cost the state, obviously, you know, funding and but I think, you know, it's what we've seen this crisis actually exacerbate an issue, you know, that impact immigrants. And so we want to be advocating this moment for, and not, you know, for those families, because there's, you know, they're a big part of our community here in the Commonwealth.
And so earlier today, I was seeing an article where how, like, Governor Charlie Baker put together his, let's say, like, task force for planning the reopening of the economy. And notably, he had, like, no representatives from labor in his planning for that. What are some of the things that that you think that, like, from your perspective, that you would want those people to be hearing and thinking about, or that you would have been advocating for if he like actually had brought in the labor voices that are essential for as we think about the next few months?
Yeah, I mean, I think like just, and I'm going to speak to about our union, but again, there's so many other workers that are in unions or not in unions that are essential to the economy and how it works, right? So, but if you look at the financial sector, the transportation sector, the university sector, the biotech sector, you know, so there's layers of workers that that make all that work, and the fact to not have labor representatives, you know, is really a big blind spot, you know. I think that you know, we always feel like we have to be pushing from the outside, you know, in the sense of getting, you know, and we're going to do that. Like, we're committed to basically thinking about what are the issues, what are, and thinking about how we, you know, workers coming back into the as we reopen the economy, if there's demands that we want to make about how you know, what should be in place so that workers can work safely, more, you know, that number one, I think that we want to figure out, you know, are there you know, through executive orders, so how do we push some of what we think is important to put in place as workers come back. And obviously we're going to have to do that through a different vehicle, given that, you know, Governor Baker is not calling labor to come to the same table. Yeah, I think that it is important to have a labor voice in all of that, because we, you know, we're part of all those, the major engines of the economy here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, because like none of those, like kind of like none of, let's say, the office buildings of people who are sitting on that, like on that commission could operate without all of the workers that keep those buildings running.
Yes, I mean, right, you know, just even the, you know, like the Boston Convention Center, right?
Yeah.
We have security officers that basically work at the convention center. You know, they were laid off, right? But then they were asked to come back once they built a hospital, right? And now the security officers are back, but you know, they're concerned about their own safety, right? And there's no, and they came back, and there's no essential pay for them, right? But they were required to, you know, to come back, you know, they are concerned about their exposure. You know, they have the same concerns, so it is. We don't want the workers to be an afterthought. Like, I think this last 4 weeks has showed us that, you know, really, if we're saying people are essential, then we need to think about them first, you know, in light of how we're thinking about coming back. Is just, how are we viewing essential workers? What is it that we need to put in place? And because the thing is, if we have another outbreak of this, right, if this virus comes back, right, they're going to be calling on those essential workers to, you know, to come forward in the same way they have in the last 4 weeks. And we just want that, you know, again, to be acknowledged by folks that are in decision-making roles here on how that all happens.
And so one thing that I'm thinking about is how we can make sure that, like, once that process of reopening, as it happens, how we can make sure that the economy works better for more people on the other side of this. What are some of the things that you think that you've been thinking about, is how that we can make sure that we don't end up seeing kind of after the recession or even depression, that we end up kind of going back to the same kind of inequality of the economy before, but instead, how can we kind of make sure that we do have more shared prosperity in the economy afterwards?
Well, I think, you know, I think that we, even in light of this, I think workers that don't have a union should be, you know, pushing for a union. They should be pushing for a voice. We think that, you know, we've already seen workers that, you know, that were probably wanting a union, but not, you know, maybe their employer, to discourage them from being part of a union, they said, okay, well, I'm going to give you a 25-cent wage increase, and then they kind of calm down their efforts, right?
Mhm.
But I think this has brought up for workers is like really where they stand, you know, and that 25 cents to get me to not join a union is not good enough anymore. You know, we're going to need to push and organize. And I think I think we've already been seeing little pockets of workers in different places wanting, you know, kind of realizing where they stand, you know, especially because what are they being asked to do, essential workers? Yet that is not coming in how they're actually getting paid, right? Or even how they're even being provided, you know, the protective equipment, right? Or even how they're treated with less than a day notice that will no longer have a job. I mean, that I just, you know, I think that, you know, I've said it to building owners here in Boston, you know, you could do better than a day. I'm sorry. Even with this crisis, you know what I mean? These workers have been in your building clean for 20 years in one, you know, and yet they get a 1 day notice, and they basically say, oh, it's because it's a crisis, you know, and it's just like, no, you could do better. And so I do think that those are, workers have to, you know, or, you know, I do think that even with a recession, depression, like there's gonna need to be groups of workers organizing, right? And I do think that our, you know, demands of workers and what's important, and them giving themselves value so that we can, you know, stand up to what will, you know, be the things that will come at us for asking for what we think we deserve, right? Those are, you know, so obviously, you know, it speaks to a lot of the pay and the treatment, you know, of workers. We've seen this throughout this pandemic, and so, you know, I think we're gonna, you know, I think that's what we're gonna need to focus our demands on. As workers, and I'm not just talking about our members of our union, but I think, you know, other workers, and that's the only way that folks have hope that they can have a collective voice to demand things, even of their employer, but also of our state and our federal government, right, in this time. And I think that that's what we have to focus on, or else, you know, it's going to be a downward spiral, you know, and we can't allow that to, you know, I mean, allow that to happen, you know. We have to, yeah.
And I think that there's such a great point about how, like, something that was true before and especially true now about the importance and the power of having kind of unions for giving workers a voice and giving them kind of and giving them power in the workplace. Because in a pandemic, you really can't be like depending on just, let's say, like a good heart of an employer to do some things. You need there to be actually kind of the ability to organize for both pressure inside and political pressure coming down on employers through the legislative process.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of, you know, we were able to accomplish what we were able to accomplish to have airport airline contractors, you know, in that federal bailout package covered, right? Because we were able to have a collective voice when it was most needed, right? We had the organization in that moment in time to make that happen, right? And workers need that. They need to be able to have the organization to be able to play a major role when things like this crisis happens, you know. So it's even more seen through this pandemic, right? About, it's not just about, you know, I want a union, so, you know, I will get a wage increase, right? It's much more than that, in regards to advocating for, you know, how we live, you know, how we, you know, how we are viewed as people, and which is totally illustrated with how, you know, this the reactions or the decisions that have been made kind of coming off of this pandemic, you know.
Definitely. And then any policies that you'd want to see embraced at the state or kind of federal level on the other side of this to help like actually on that front, what are some of the things that we could be doing to make it easier for workers to join or kind of form a union? Kind of things that could happen at the state or federal level.
I mean, obviously there's you know, more so there's you know, at the federal level, you know, we are asking for as part of the next bailout round is more sectoral bargaining, like more of a mandate, you know, so making it easier for folks to be able in a certain industry, right? Yeah. Because you could see with the fast food that, oh, it's because there's not one entity, there's franchises, there's, you know, and it's the setup. I mean, just like what, you know, that basically makes it hard for people to actually join together and advocate for a certain agenda, you know what I mean? That will help, you know, you know, it helps people outside of a union as it helps people inside a union when we're able to do that. And I think that, you know, that's what we're demanding in this moment in time as part of, so we are talking about how to, you know, even with this bailout legislation is how do we push forth the ability for more workers to join unions.
Other countries have sectoral bargaining, right?
Yes, other countries do. So it is, and the same employers here, like McDonald's here, you know, in other countries, those workers have a union, you know, it's just, and so that's I think, you know, what is something that we need to be looking for as we, you know, basically, you know, confront everything that's going to come post this pandemic. But, you know, it's not a moment to kind of walk away or you know, lose sight of what is important, right? That to fight for.
Yeah, no, you're saying it is really an absurd thing in the way in which various like franchises will just pretend that they're like completely separate organizations from the other franchises with the same branding and the same look and the same chain of hierarchy in order to get around kind of offering workers a fair deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, so what are some things that for people what are some ways that people can show support and kind of in solidarity for workers in this struggle? So like those who are, yeah.
So for example, I know that the labor unions tomorrow are going to do a car caravan to to recognize workers at the BCEC Field Hospital, Hope Hospital at the Convention Center. So they're starting a car caravan at 3:00 by South Station, and then they're going to be delivering like 500 masks, you know, to workers there on site. And I mean, obviously those are supportive, you know, things people can do. Mm-hmm. I do think that there is other just, you know, obviously in the ways that we can do right now with you know, remotely, it just supporting obviously legislative efforts, like I said, like the driver's license that we talked about before, right? And pushing the principles of the state legislature to really consider moving that forward in this moment in time. There's also people are organizing, even though it's all remotely, that people are organizing and supporting those efforts, right? Because people, you know, a lot of workers, even in unions, they're actually having to push back and fight forward in the sense of, like, for example, our union, this is a contract year for us. So in September 30th, the contract that covers about 14,000 workers' standards in cleaning expires.
Oh, wow. So, yeah. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and so this pandemic has obviously impacted that, you know, but you know what, we are still recruiting strike captains. We're saying now more than ever, we need to have members that are taking responsibility to communicate and activate other workers
Mhm.
at the work site, even if they're laid off. I said they're part, this economy is going to come back at some point in time, whenever, and we want workers are going to come back into the
Mhm.
industry. And so we want to include them in this fight, right? Because like I've said to employers, like, we're not going to wait until September to look around and say, which way do we go? We're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so we either find we find something that that we can both agree on now that stabilizes the industry for some period of time until it's in a better place where we can talk about all issues, but we need to figure out, or we're going to be in a position that has a lot more tension to basically because we're not going to we're going to want stability for thousands of these workers and their families. We're not going to. And so and I know that our union is not the only one facing those types of fights, and struggles. And universities are some universities are asking people to forego their wage increases, even though they're calling them essential, right? And many times not wanting even to pay them to be quarantined. But yes, they're saying, given that we've had to give millions back to students and we want you to forego your wage increase come July or January, and so there are struggles that workers are facing that I think as there's ways in which people can support those efforts outside of federal advocacy, state advocacy, and then just campaigns that help workers, or even fighting for being a voice for workers at the local level to get essential pay is a big one too right now for all those workers that are working and obviously fearing their what exposure they have. So
Definitely. No, and you were talking about this being a contract year, probably especially just shows like what kind of demands need to be made in terms of workplace conditions, as to show like the need for greater resilience and greater planning around making sure that workers are able to be safe on the job.
Yeah, and it is but it is also difficult of like how we do all that and do what we're doing, do what we need to do now, right? So it is but that's again, we're not going to wait till the end of September and say which way we go. We're gonna plan, and workers are finding ways now to communicate in ways they didn't even know how to, or remotely, and keeping in contact with each other. And we're doing a lot of even though we can't, especially we're not we've not been able to go to workplaces, and we're a union, we're used to big marches, we're used to big meetings, and we're not doing all that, but we are still staying contact with workers through through a lot of Zoom through Zoom calls and teletown halls, and by even to basically connect with people about what we need to do. And so we can't stop organizing even in light of all of this.
Yeah, and that must be kind of like an especially valuable thing when you have that kind of, let's say, deterritorialization of a lot of stuff, that you can have a worker who's, let's say, kind of on one part of the state or the region, and works in other parts, being able to connect about their experiences on the job and what they're seeing, and kind of that sense of collective struggle, when you can, in a way in which you might not have been able to do if you all had to like drive to the same venue.
Exactly. No, we have seen that just in our political advocacy work. Like we had a couple town halls with some of the our federal delegation, and before we were trying to get somebody, let's say from Springfield, to come to Boston, and so, but as soon as that was lifted, it was like, oh yeah, we have somebody for people that can get on the phone and tell their story to this congressional leader, in a way that we weren't, it wasn't part of the equation, and so I do think that we've been, there's been some more use of tools that we were probably underutilizing, that because we were relying a lot on face-to-face, obviously, especially with workers that largely are immigrants and we were having a lot of face-to-face contact with, so but
it's one of the things that like nothing really can like beat that kind of like face-to-face interaction. It's just kind of an interesting moment where like people are experimenting with organizing tools that can still be useful on the other side and can help inform and kind of improve kind of advocacy for the long term.
Right, and it's actually and our workers have responded to it. Like they appreciate the outreach and we're in this moment in time, because this is when they most need it. They need that contact to the organization to understand what is happening, what can I do, what can we do, right? And so I think it has allowed us to kind of, again, use some tools that we've underutilized in the past.
And so tomorrow is like a big kind of day for labor, with kind of it being May Day. Any plans that you have? Any interesting plans for May Day?
So obviously, because of there's usually community allies put on a big march, and there's a lot of connections with globally. So I will, on behalf of our union, I will be participating on some of the labor conversations that will be had, and spaces kind of to recognize workers tomorrow. So I will be able to join those conversations, and as I said, there's going to be a car caravan in the afternoon to workers directly around what seeing them as essential workers, and so I think that there's what the good thing about it is, what I hear is a lot of these conversations are going to be shared nationally. There's going to be a connection around all the folks coming together around May Day and recognizing workers, especially essential workers, in this moment in time.
Nice. Yeah, just before that ability to have that kind of connection across distance is just especially valuable now, insofar as it kind of has that collective struggle, as well as just the connection at a time of lots of isolation, but like a special value about being within an organization.
Yeah, and so and I think that it'll we're sharing that information to our members to if they can connect, and and obviously we're connecting with allies and all that too, for because again, we can't do this work alone, right? We have to have a larger collective voice. It's not enough just as one union. Our members are so much part of the communities in which there's organizing being done, whether it's on rent control and housing and all these, and so connecting with those groups tomorrow on May Day is also important. That it not that when we talk about labor, we're not just talking about unions like the one that I work with, but it's also all the organizing that's being done across different facets that affect people's lives, not just the workplace, but housing issues and other
people as community members, as well as when kind of rent control is a good example of, is for those wage increases to really matter, they can't just be like sucked off away by like the cost of housing, and like as that connects to kind of the other issues of different facets of economic security, or if people are living in like kind of environmentally unsafe environments, and the kind of how that's not an entirely separate issue.
Right. And a lot of when we've had with our members have had candidate interviews with elected officials, one of the main thing they want to talk about is housing, right? They're about the cost of housing because, you know, they're like, okay, I have a union, I have a little bit more stability in my workplace, but it's not enough, you know, if the housing prices really make it difficult for me to be able to, you know, be in a place where I can actually work and live.
Yeah, because like that's one thing that like if people's ability to actually, let's say, like live near where they work is a luxury that not everybody has, and especially like in like a place like Boston that's getting increasingly expensive, that's just pushing out the workforce further and further away.
Right, and it doesn't do anything for our economy here because they, you know, whether it be the airport or the universities or, you know, I mean, the universities don't want to pay for parking, so they want people to use the T. But if people are having to live way out, you know, it's not, you know. So they do rely on a service workforce here to make all of this happen. And so it is, you know, but it has to be, you know, people have the ability to live, in you know, close to where they're asked to work.
So as we get, because I like to keep this down to an hour, what would be some of the final takeaways and messages you would want to convey to somebody who's watching, either now or later, about what you want them to leave with and what actions that they can take?
One of the things is just seeing that through this pandemic, right, that really when we talk about who is essential and who are the frontline workers, that again, largely we've taken for granted, you know, or they've been unseen, that those workers are the workers that we should be advocating, you know, and strengthening in our economy. And so however we can do that versus federal advocacy, state advocacy, or again, supporting campaigns that support workers, but also, you know, the supporting immigrants, right? So like Jobs with Justice, for example, created a fund, a docu fund, you know, to have some assistance to undocumented workers. You know, I think that more so than ever, I think this highlighted the need to continue to support efforts that strengthen those frontline workers. So,
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again so much for joining me, because like it's been always been a pleasure, because I know in various coalitions that Progressive Mass is in, 32BJ is, so it's a kind of a wonderful ally to have, and kind of such an important role in strengthening the voice of workers, which is always essential, and in a crisis, kind of vital if we're going to end up better on the other side of this.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for inviting us and for working in coalition with us on a lot of other issues that affect not only our members, but other workers and the community here at large. So thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Bye.